guest is Chris Cowan, and we are talking about Holocracy. Quick backstory on Chris: he's a partner at Holacracy One. He's a former associate at Booz Allen Hamilton. He has an MDiv from Harvard in human development, and he has a doctorate in education from George Washington University. And we kind of met up in the context of our interest in the integral world, and he's just a nice guy. I think you'll like him. Chris, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is going to be a good conversation.
Yeah. So why don't you kind of tee us up with just a few words about what Holocracy is?
Yeah, I think probably the easiest way to describe it is really kind of an organizational operating system. It's a metaphor that we use a lot, the same way a computer has an operating system.
Yeah.
You know, organizations have kind of this fundamental operating system, and really that operating system comes down to the power and authority structure, the decision-making structure underneath it all. And so a lot of the work that management consultants do and people who are into leadership development, and which involves so many people, because we're all kind of live and work in different organizations. We know there are kind of some problems with them, and we try to kind of come up with new kinds of solutions to them. But underneath it all is still the kind of the same fundamental power system at play. And so a lot of these interventions and new approaches that we use to try to make organizations better and essentially kind of just get tacked on, kind of like software installed on the same old operating system. So, yes. Fundamentally, you end up with some compatibility issues. It might try to work, it might work for a little while, but just a matter of time before it kind of falls away, or it becomes quite buggy. And the old system kind of rejects the new kind of approach. So Holacracy is really about changing that fundamental power system underneath it all, by distributing authority across the organization. There's a whole process and a whole set of rules captured in the Holacracy Constitution that defines how the decisions are distributed. But essentially, I like the metaphor of the operating system. I think it kind of gets a nice, clean way to kind of describe really why Holacracy is different than a lot of other approaches. And it also kind of captures, I think, conceptually some of the some of the difficulties we have in talking about it, because it's this really fundamental shift at the core of the system that most people just take for granted. And so it's very easy to kind of get pigeonhole Holacracy as just another new approach to kind of shared leadership or something. And while that may be true in a way, it is also a very deep shift underneath it all.
So pushing out the kind of operating system metaphor, if we were doing a Holacracy installation, is that a binary thing? Is it sort of like we're all in and you guys have sort of written the underlying rules for us, or is there a partial adoption that's possible?
Yeah, we see a lot of people try partial adoptions, and I think there's a good community of do-it-yourselfers, that kind of get the Holacracy Constitution. We provide a lot of resource for them to help them kind of install it. It seems, though, that it works best when you're all in. And so when we're Holacracy One, the consulting part of our work, when we're working with organizations, it is a requirement for our engagement with them that the power holder, whoever is currently in power, whether it be a CEO or a president or a board, will actually sign over their authority into the Holacracy Constitution, essentially ratifying that the organization now runs on the Constitution. It runs on the rules of the Constitution, and they are going to hold themselves to those rules as well. Now, of course, in theory, they could always say, okay, we're no longer doing that at some point. If they own the company, per se. They could still say, we're switching back. But from our perspective, if we're working with clients, it's an all or nothing thing. Either this system is running the organization and we're then happy to help you, or it's not, in which case, best of luck. There's lots of moving parts, so it's kind of like this nicely balanced game that if you only kind of take one piece of it, it may be helpful for a time, but then we're really kind of back to just kind of tacking on some kind of new trendy fad approach without really changing anything underneath it all. And that's not really, I think, where our passion is. Our passion is about actually making organizations better, creating this really fruitful soil from which all the other great interventions and approaches that we have can really start to flourish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are there parts of that, the constitution that you provide, where people might say, hey, I'm just thinking of sort of politics analogy, I'm not really into education as a right, but I'm totally into free speech and the other stuff. Are there bits that I can, or we can as an organization, say that's just not really what we're into, or is it sort of a fully interdependent document, so that wouldn't make sense?
Yeah, I would say it's fully interdependent, and so that wouldn't really make sense. Now, with that said, there are always revisions. They're on the 4th version of it now. It's essentially kind of an evolutionary kind of process. So the rule system that we have now captured in the Constitution does work as a game, a very well-balanced game, but that balance has come from a lot of imbalance in previous versions, little things that didn't quite work well that have been tweaked and improved, and we fully expect that to continue. That's precisely, I think, a lot of what drives the evolution of organizations and drives the evolution of this thing that we're calling holacracy, is really kind of practice-based, informed by what really happens, not getting in the way of the work, not getting too predictive or too mind-driven, but being much more responsive and adaptive to how things actually play out. So the whole system is set up to kind of rapidly address the real concerns on an ongoing basis, knowing that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So the whole system is set up to be as adaptive as possible. With that said, it is a fairly balanced game, at least from the constitutional standpoint. And yeah, clients often do there's certain parts that they don't like. In fact, I would say, if there's not some part of it that you don't like, you're probably not really in tune with what's going on. There's a great beauty to it, to me, that there's so much going on within this system. It's a very well integrated system. So going up and down the spiral, it includes so much that when you're in it and you're working in it, inevitably you're going to kind of meet yourself in there somewhere, and you're going to find your own challenges, your own growing edges that are going to push you. So if you're not kind of bothered by some part of it, you probably just haven't gotten to that part yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel it delivers more bang for your buck, if you will, in terms of staff sort of satisfaction and sense of purpose and meaning and perhaps autonomy with your work versus productivity? Or do you think that those things are both net winners in relatively equal measure?
Yeah, I think they're both net winners, and I think they really do go hand in hand. I think those two things end up being interdependent. If you're familiar with any of the research on motivation, Dan Pink has done a great summary of a lot of that, that directly connects that sense of engagement to productivity and autonomy and a sense of mastery to productivity. The beauty of Holacracy is it doesn't directly try to manipulate the system from a top-down way that kind of tries to force people to be engaged or tries to indirectly encourage people to be engaged. It simply provides this container, a structured set of rules that is inherently fair, and then people are able to actually show up however they are, and the Constitution is available to all, and the rules apply to all. And so some people are going to be able to find that, man, this sense of autonomy and mastery in the work that I do, now I'm really energized and passionate about it. Other people may find, a lot of what I got out of my work was the sense of ego, or the sense of reward I got, the fact that people had to listen to me, and that I had all this influence, and they may find that that's taken away now. Now the way that the rules work and the way that the system works is a little bit different. We see that a lot over the past few decades of trying different things to improve engagement. You can see little spikes for a while, but I think that trend and the spikiness has been going on for so long now that people are rightfully skeptical of the next new thing. The next thing that's supposed to improve their engagement. And so I think for us, it's something we observe as an outcome. It seems to happen, but it's certainly not something that's like baked in, or is like we're trying to do. I think it just by having some autonomy to make decisions, you just naturally find that people are more engaged in their work.
Yeah, it makes total sense. So one of the things I'm into as a sort of approach to work is, getting things done, GTD, David Allen's sort of system. And I'm curious what the sort of relationship is between kind of GTD principles and Holacracy. One of the things that, if I'm doing it well, that I like about GTD is the kind of regular sweep to kind of catch things that are incomplete loops or unfinished projects or appointments you need to rearrange, but sort of giving yourself a time and a process to do that. I know one of the things that you talk about in Holocracy is sensing tensions. Are they similar principles, and how does that sort of sensing tension process work, and why do you think it's important?
Yeah, there's lots of responses that I could say. So I think on the relationship between GTD and Holacracy, I think is very strong, both from a even historical perspective. David Allen companies adopted Holacracy to run their organization. David Allen
didn't know that. Right.
Signed over, yep. So the David Allen companies runs with Holacracy, and I think he was able to see early on kind of the parallels, at least in terms of the paradigm at play. GTD is very much kind of the individual organization system, and Holacracy is kind of GTD for organizations, as a way of thinking about it. And so, so to get to the kind of the second piece about kind of the mind sweep and the regular scheduled, the weekly reviews in GTD terms, Holacracy has two regular meeting processes. One is a tactical meeting, and there's a whole kind of process that we recommend for that, a particular type of facilitation. It can be fairly rigid, I think, it can seem fairly rigid for people at first, but when you kind of really experience it, you'll see kind of how absolutely efficient it can be.
Yes.
So I think tactical meetings are one of the things that people really like about Holacracy. And then there's the governance meetings, which is when you're actually working on the structure of the organization itself. And that's kind of a deeper level, taking a step back to look at how do we get things done, not necessarily in terms of practical terms, but in terms of like the plumbing of the system. How are things wired?
Yes.
Do we have the right roles? Do we have the right accountabilities? Those kinds of things. And those two things happen on a fairly regular basis. Secretaries, which was one of the core roles within Holacracy, schedules those meetings. We have elected facilitators, or the circles in Holacracy terms, elect the facilitators to facilitate those meetings, and they happen on a fairly regular basis. In addition, the Constitution, the Holacracy Constitution, does specify certain duties of individual partners or individual employees or individual people who are working within an organization that's using Holacracy. And some of those duties include that you're tracking your next projects and actions in a system that's outside of your own head. It doesn't have to be a full GTD system, but you do have a duty, for example, as, let's say, if we're co-partners and we're working in an organization that's running Holacracy, if I ask you to see your list of projects and next actions, you have to show it to me. You have to have the ability to show it to me. So there are certain duties baked into the system, and at least at Holacracy 1, we all find that GTD in particular it fits really well with that.
Yeah. And is that a whole company meeting?
No, it's circle meetings. Yeah. So they're like a concentric circles. So circles within circles within circles. So the broadest possible circle, you could consider that a circle meeting of the entire company, but it's really only representations. It's only core circle members who are representing sub-circles that are there. And every circle organizes itself and structures itself. One of the key distinctions that I think can often get lost when, like, as I was saying it, I was hesitating because I think it's one of the distinctions that often gets lost, but I find it really helpful. The distinction between self-directed and self-organized. Lots of times, like some of the press that came out around Holacracy was talking about it being self-directed, which is actually not at all true. The circles don't just do whatever they want. Brian Robertson, one of the co-founders, he uses the metaphor of like a cell that's self-directed is called cancer. The cell that just does whatever it wants, irrespective of the body that it's in. You don't want that. But in Holacracy, these circles and these subcircles just organize themselves, and cells actually do that. In the body, they figure out how to get resources in and process what they need within the broader context, but they govern themselves internally. It's the same principle with Holacracy.
Got it.
Yeah.
Have you found that there are particular sort of industries or types of companies that you've had most traction with? And I know that tech companies traditionally are more into flat hierarchies and perhaps more, autonomous working and people working different hours and so on. And also, how do you see that emerging? Like, is there sectors that maybe haven't really adopted Holacracy yet that you sense are kind of opening up to it?
Interesting. Yeah, two things come to my mind. One is that I think you're right. I think there's a certain I think people that are especially familiar, or leaders who are especially familiar with software development,
Yes.
regardless of this particular market sector. But in that sense, people who are familiar with software development, particularly agile, when it comes to technology, I think you'll hear a lot about a lot of people refer to Holacracy as kind of agile for organizations. It's another way of thinking about it. Really responsive, iterative, teamwork, team-oriented kinds of stuff. I think that's accurate. So I think in that sense, yes, there's the technology market might, I think Holacracy appeals to them, especially if they have some sort of background in software development, particularly agile. The second response is I think it really has less to do with the markets and more to do with the leaders themselves, the power holders, really, I should say, the power holders themselves. We've seen that with Tony Hsieh at Zappos. We've seen that with a lot of our clients, David Allen. People who have been successful entrepreneurs and are on their second company or third company, or there's at a time in their career where they've realized their own limitations. They're just a single person, and having all this information flow up to them and then back out just doesn't make any sense. There's no possible way, and it's overwhelming. They don't even want to do it.
Yes.
So there's a certain amount, I think, of it takes a certain kind of leader, a certain kind of founder, or a certain kind of power holder to kind of recognize their own limitations and then try to say, okay, what do I do about this? Because everything else I'm trying is still just relying on me to push it and me to try it. And while Holacracy does leverage that, like I mentioned, the power holder signing over, ratifying the Constitution. We don't. Not every employee ratifies the Constitution. It's just the power holder. So that's the power system at play, and so that's what we use. That's what you have to use. It's what you've got. But in order to kind of really leverage that well, it takes a person in that position who recognizes their own limitations. If they see Holacracy just for its adaptability and they see it just as a competitive advantage, which I think it is, but if that's really the primary driver and it's not because if they haven't gotten to that point where they realize fundamentally how difficult it is to run something large like an organization with only one power holder or a small group of power holders, and how little sense that makes. If they're not already kind of feeling that pressure themselves, then Holacracy is going to be a hard sell, because they're going to have to give up a lot. They get far more in return, but I think if they're not already kind of there and looking for something, it's a hard sell.
Yeah, it's kind of like doing corporate social responsibility for marketing reasons as opposed to social responsibility reasons.
Precisely.
Yeah. We're sort of coming to the end of our time here. I wanted to ask you, you say you're on version 4. It's an evolving model and constitutional structure. How far in that process do you sort of feel that you are? I sense that something can just be constantly evolving, and there's always like the latest software addition. But do you sense that there are still sort of like key sticking points in the Constitution or sort of working services where you're like, yeah, we know this bit's kind of, it's not quite right yet, or do you feel that the sort of product that's out there is already, sort of the best that is out there in the sort of marketplace of organizational structures?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think it's in terms of like how far along in the process, one of the roles we have is Constitution Steward, whose job it is, who's accountable for updating the Constitution. And essentially what happens is, in a lot of the consulting work that we do, we get questions. Clients want to know, well, it says this, but what about this? And by using real experience, we're able to discover, oh yeah, I can see the confusion here, or I can see how we might be able to address that, or I can see how we might be able to address that. It's not unlike, again, using technology metaphors, like new operating systems, new versions of old operating systems.
Yeah.
What you have kind of works for a while, but constantly trying to update it as you go. Currently, our process is still heavily centralized, and that was strategic from the standpoint of the same reason that Holacracy is a registered trademark. It's strategic decisions to kind of honor the balance of the game, yeah, and the integrity of what it is, because a lot of times, things, especially with a word like Holacracy, could get co-opted, and we see this in the press a lot of people just saying, kind of any flat structure is now a Holacracy, and it's like Holacracy is not flat. It's rigidly hierarchical. These circles they have subcircles and supercircles. They do answer in a way. They do rely upon each other. So it's definitely not flat, but you'll see that word pop up. And it's nice to be able to point to, that might be a new way of doing things, and I'm sure that works for some people. Just to clarify, that's not Holacracy, because Holacracy is a registered trademark. So it provides us with that leverage. And I think similarly, the centralization of the Constitution strategically has worked, because to kind of maintain the integrity of the rule set. Moving forward, though, again, building on the wisdom of what we see in software development, I think going open source has always been the intention to leverage the wisdom of the crowd to find better ways of evolving the Constitution itself. It's very much on the radar. We've got projects already and have had for a while to make that happen, but currently it's still a centralized process.
Got it. So people are piqued in their interest and they want to know more. Is there any way to see any example of these constitutions, or is there somewhere you'd point people to know more about the work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, holacracy.org, www.holacracy.org. Is our main site. Currently, it's the home site for kind of Holacracy itself and Holacracy 1, which is the company that I work for, the kind of the pioneer of Holacracy. But we're not the only service provider, actually, of Holacracy coaching and consulting. There's several service providers in addition to us. And so one of the strategies, even within Holacracy 1, is to let Holacracy evolve beyond just our company. But right currently on the website, they're kind of mixed together. So you'll see things about trainings that we offer, and then you'll see history of Holacracy. You'll see a lot of different content on there, but that's the one place to go, I think, to learn more. And we've got projects now to kind of make that a little bit more streamlined. It can be a bit overwhelming at first, but if you scroll to the bottom of that main page, I think there's some good links about how it works and some kind of starting resources.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, good to be with you, man. Thanks for giving us time this morning. I'm always interested in what's emergent in this, the kind of edge of consciousness. It seems to me that this is very squarely placed there, and I've been lucky enough to interface a bit with some organizations like the guys in Downtown Project Las Vegas, Zappos, and the Integral Center in Boulder who are using it. So good luck with it all.
Yeah, thanks, Jack.
Look forward to staying in touch on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, take care.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye.